What's up, everybody? Welcome into Talking College Football. I'm your host, Phillip Jordan from Last Word on College Football and 96.9 The Legend in Dothan, Alabama, where I'm the in-studio host and producer of Dothan Wolves Football. Everybody had a great weekend. Got a fantastic show planned for you guys on this Tuesday. I am going to be joined by Matt Murschel from the Orlando Sentinel, where he is national college football writer there. We are going to preview the ACC. Did the Big 12 last week, do the ACC this week, and later in the week, we'll be doing the SEC with Adam Spencer from Saturday Down South. We will talk about the remarks made by Jim Phillips at ACC Football Kickoff last week. A lot of interesting stuff there. We will break down what happened in Clemson last year and what makes them the favorites in the ACC this upcoming season. Other contenders, we'll talk about the Miami Hurricanes, NC State Wolfpack. That team's got a lot of buzz right now. We'll talk about Wake Forest, Pitt, some interesting teams there. And what is the forecast? What is the outlook for the Florida State Seminoles this upcoming season? And after that, some news out of Knoxville that hit on Friday I am going to give my thoughts on to close out the show. Before I bring Matt on, though, let you guys know you can find me in the podcast. You can find me on social media at PJordanSEC. Podcast is available on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, YouTube, wherever you check out podcasts, you can check out Talking College Football. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review. I will read it on a future edition of the show. And if you leave 4 stars, you're a straight up hater. So please, get them 5 stars, but also them reviews. So really do appreciate it. You can always email me at sports.philipjordan@gmail.com. Now let's preview the ACC. Everybody, joining me on the show today is Matt Murschel. You can check him out over at Orlando Sentinel, where he's their national college football writer. And Matt, we talked about off air. It's been 2 years since we've done this. My apologies for waiting so long to ask you back, but I do appreciate you taking time to come on the show.
Oh, no problem. It's been a busy 2 years, right? I think that's what we talked about. It's just so much has happened on and off the field, and look where we are right now. We're in the middle of about 4 or 5 weeks before the season starts. We're talking conference realignment. You got NIL, you got transfer portal. I mean, it's as if the sport continues to spin, and there's been no slowdown whatsoever ever since the pandemic kind of ended.
Yeah, and college football really has changed because it used to feel like, okay, obviously the season's busy with stuff to talk about. And then you got into when you just had the recruiting, National Signing Day in February. Ramp up a little bit in spring, but after that, so you got the media days, it was kind of quiet. Not a lot of stuff would come out on college football to talk about. But now it's gotten a lot like the NFL, where it's 365, it's 12 months a year. There's always something to talk about with college football at the national level now.
Well, very much so. I mean, like you said, this year, we came right out of spring. We jumped right into talking about, NIL and the impact of NIL, you name it, the likeness. We started getting through that, and then all of a sudden this conference realignment stuff happened, and we saw some schools making movements in the SEC, and then the Big 12 and the Big 10, and it just kind of continued to roll. And I think you're right. It used to be a time period where we used to have a couple months, 2-3 months, really to kind of slow down a little bit. The coaches were on vacation. Players were usually doing their off-season workouts or at home for a little bit. Now, I mean, you're talking to coaches pretty much every month now, and ADs every month now, whereas usually you didn't talk to those guys for maybe 3 or 4 months. Now you're constantly in communication with, because there's stuff always going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's really there's no time off with the sport. And I brought you over. You're going to talk about ACC football, which I think our opening part of the conversation kind of can a broader scope of college football too as well. I know Jim Phillips. I'm always intrigued with the commissioners. What does the commissioner say? Because you kind of there's some coaches that are going to give you some good stuff at these media days, but what's the commissioner going to say? And Jim Phillips, he comes across a guy to me that he's a real fan of the ways that we're kind of college football is going away from. He's more of a traditionalist, just kind of gathering from his comments last week. It was what stood out the most to you with what Jim Phillips said at ACC Football Kickoff last week?
Well, I think for Jim, this was a big deal for him. This was his second time standing in front of the media, second ACC football media days. Last time it was basically introducing himself and talking about how the conference was strong and they were coming off of signing their ACC network deal with ESPN. This was a much different conversation, to everyone. It was about, listen, we're still a strong conference, but he understood very much so that this is a conference that there's lots of moving parts going on in college football, and the ACC is one of those leagues that finds itself now caught on the outside looking in. You know that the SEC and the Big Ten, they've obviously expanded, adding some schools. They're getting stronger. They're getting better. There's a lot more revenue that's been projected to come out in the next 5-10 years. They're clearly the leaders in the pack. Well, the ACC didn't really have that. They tried to team up with the Big Ten and the Pac-12 to form this alliance, thinking that maybe they could somehow slow things down and they could find a way to grow a little bit as a conference. That never really happened. The alliance really kind of crumbled when the Big Ten decided to add, UCLA and USC. And so I think for Jim Phillips, it was trying to basically let everyone understand, listen, we're in a good spot. We're confident in our grant of rights deal. We know there's some teams out there in our conference that might be interested in looking around and looking at the SEC and thinking about making a move, but we're a really strong conference. We're going to try to find ways to continue to add revenue. Whether it's going to be it's not going to be through a current media rights deal, but they may find some other ways to do some things. And he just tried to maybe calm everything. And, I didn't expect him to come out and be, woe is me, which he didn't do. And I think that's what a lot of these commissioners are trying to do is, let everyone understand we're in a good spot. If they could get Notre Dame, as you mentioned, in football, it would be huge for them. But at this point, that grant of rights deal, which runs through 2036, that really kind of locks a lot of the schools in there. There isn't going to be a mass exodus of some of these schools that might be leaving. So he feels pretty confident about it, and he feels like the schools themselves are committed to playing in the conference itself. So whether that's the case or not, I think remains to be seen.
Yeah, you really got to think if they could get Notre Dame to come in as a full-time football team. Remember that would pretty much. I think it would be almost a game changer because we're so much talking about it's just the SEC and the Big Ten. I think if ACC could get Notre Dame to come over as a full-time football member, that we got 3 big conferences then. It's not just the 2.
Yeah, I think it would be a huge piece. Notre Dame is going to be the next big movement in this conference realignment. It's the big piece, and that's why the Big Ten and the SEC and the ACC are interested in getting Notre Dame. And Jim Phillips feels like they've got an inside track on this because, obviously they currently house, Notre Dame's remaining, other sports, outside of football. So they have a good working relationship with Notre Dame. Now, I'm not so certain Notre Dame's going to join a conference. I know a lot of people feel that's going to be the next move, but I think if Notre Dame can continue to get a deal with NBC, as it's been reported, that maybe in a $75 million range, I think then they feel like they're financially comfortable. They don't have to join a conference, and they feel like at this point they're not going to be left out of the college football playoff. Whatever version of this comes about, whether it expands to 8 or 12 teams or 16 or whatever, they feel like they're going to have a seat at the table there. As long as that happens, Notre Dame says, we're happy with this. We're not going to leave. Everything is working out for us. We're going to remain independent. If that's the case, then I think that kind of maybe changes some things in how people approach things. I don't think the Big Ten feels like they have to expand now. I know the SEC, now they've got Texas and Oklahoma, doesn't have to. But if you're the ACC, you're looking around thinking, okay, if Notre Dame doesn't join us in football, how else are we going to make some more revenue? What else can we do that will generate additional revenue that's going to help maybe ease some of the concerns by schools in our conference that maybe are looking around thinking, well, man, if Florida or Alabama is getting $100 million a year in 2029 and we're only getting 60, how can we make up that revenue? And I think that's what Jim's kind of hoping for. And I think it just remains to be seen. I think we'll find out in the next 6 months, but once that happens, once that piece falls with Notre Dame, I think that it just goes back to, I think things will slow down outside of what's going to happen with the Pac-12 and maybe the Big 12.
I do like it how so far we've heard all conference commissioners basically say the same thing. We're weighing all options, which is, to me, and I would love to hear your thought on that comment. To me, it's like they're saying, we've had conversations. I'm not going to tell you who we're talking to, but we're having conversations.
Yeah, I think that's what everyone is doing. I think the moment that Texas and Oklahoma, bolted for the SEC, I think that opened the door for everybody. We saw that obviously with the UFC and UCLA. They were, this was a surprise. They were looking around saying, what can we do we've got the LA market. We're major brands. How can we get ourselves into a conference that's going to pay us major brand money? And I think that's why they reached out to the Big Ten and said, listen, we feel like this is a good benefit for you. We feel like this can help out. And I'm sure once that happened as well, you saw these other schools really starting to ramp up their conversations. I'm sure there were a lot of text messages and phone calls, from a lot of schools to a lot of conference commissioners saying, hey, are you interested? We're interested in moving on. What would you think about adding us, or what would you think about, this idea? And I think a lot of conferences sat down and think, okay, well, maybe that's a possibility, but I think it has to be the right fit. I mean, for the Big Ten to get USC and UCLA, it was the right fit in the sense that it gave them kind of a coast-to-coast kind of brand, and it gave them a major market in Los Angeles. So they felt like this was the right move for them. There's some moves that maybe don't make sense. You could see why the Big Ten didn't reach out to get Oregon or Washington right away. Maybe they felt like those doesn't necessarily fit the brand that they're looking for right now or are going to help them out. So I think everyone may be looking around and making contact, but I think what has to happen with your conference is what's going to help us. Because the worst thing you could do is add a school to your conference, expand, and they don't bring anything. They don't bring a market, or they don't bring enough value that all of a sudden it starts detracting from your current media rights deal. And then you got your core schools aren't making nearly as much money as they were before then.
Jumping into the conference, the ACC going into the season, I think it's kind of intriguing. Everybody's, it looks like everybody's going to pick, is picking Clemson as the favorite. But after last year, that's not an overwhelming favorite like they would be before. But with Clemson 10-3 last year, and that's you're a good program when 10-3 is like a down year. I mean, that's where you're at with Clemson. Oh, woe is me from some programs, I'm sure. When you saw Clemson play last year, quarterback was issues. I know injuries, offensive line, but for you, what was the issue? What went wrong at Clemson last year, you believe?
I think it was the offense. It was flat out the offense, and it was almost as if DJ Uiagalelei didn't look comfortable at times to me in the offense. So, I don't know if he was trying too hard. I don't know if the offense, if because of some injuries, because of some offensive line concerns, he just didn't look like the quarterback that we saw. The small sample size we saw the year before, where he stepped in the Notre Dame game, where he was able to come in and fill in for Trevor Lawrence. I feel like, something changed. Maybe some of that's confidence. Maybe some of that was his ability to read defenses. Talent sometimes can kind of help you to a point to, kind of overlook the fact that maybe you're not reading the defenses correctly. You can get by using your arm and your legs to kind of, break down plays or make things work. But there's a point then all of a sudden where teams start, really kind of scheming for you that, you can't see that happening. So to me, it was DJ Uiagalelei in a lot of ways. But I also think the offense didn't help out. And they had injuries. They had injuries at some of the key positions at wide receiver, and they really lost some of that playmaking ability. I felt like this was still a solid defensive team. And as you mentioned, I mean, listen, this is a team that won 10 games, and we all, going into the season, we're like, this was a down year for them. I mean, this was an off year for them. So I do see why a lot of people have been picked as the favorite going in. And I've got them probably the favorite going in as well. I mean, again, if they can fix their offensive problems, if they can kind of get the pieces together, I think that offensive line has been around. So they've got that experience. I think that Clemson, by the way, has one of the best defensive fronts in college football. I think it's probably easily the best in the ACC, and I think that's going to help them out a lot. Now they've got to get some holes filled and some maturity in the back end with the secondary, but I still feel like this is a strong team, and I don't know if there's anyone, at least in Atlantic at this point, that can really challenge them.
And it's an interesting year, a transition in a way for Clemson, because Dabo Swinney doesn't have his two aces as his coordinators. Tony Elliott's gone to Virginia to be the head coach. Brent Venables is now at Oklahoma. I'm kind of intrigued to see how that works with the coordinator situation, because it's been a long time since he's had to look for other coordinators. You're so used to those guys being right there with Dabo Swinney. So now I know they promoted from within, but I think that's an intriguing part of the upcoming season for them as well.
Oh, very much so. And I think the big one to me was Venables. I think losing Brent Venables, and everything you read is that this was his time. That Dabo said to Brent, it's time to move on. You can't turn down this job at Oklahoma. So I just think Brent Venables' personality. He's a fiery guy who you've seen the clips where they've got to pull him back off the field. He's out in the field, just being a maniac, running through his signs and his scheme. So I think the passion and that kind of personality was what really kind of the defense took on. So I think that's where I'm interested to see, how does Clemson come from that? Do they still have that fire and passion? I think obviously promoting from within helps a little bit of that. You're not bringing in someone totally new and and the players have to figure out what's going on here. I think you get a little bit of that. We saw some of that in that bowl game. But again, to me, those guys, those are special type of coaches, and I think that's where I want to see how this defense, can they continue to step up and play at that level. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of changes made schematically on the defensive side of the football. I think they're still going to play the intense game. They're still going to try to create turnovers, and when you've got talent like they've got, I think they're going to be fine. What's going to be interesting for me is in the next couple of years, what are they getting on the sense of through the recruiting trail? Because again, a lot of players wanted to play for Venables because of that passion. So it's going to be interesting to see if that happens, if they can continue to do that. But I think that to me was the bigger move. Not to take anything away from Tony Elliott. I think Tony Elliott's a special guy, but I just think it's easier. You saw the passion coming out of Venables, and I think that's going to be the thing with the defense.
Looking at the rest of the conference at contenders, I know a lot of people are excited to see what Mario Cristobal can do at Miami. Can he bring the U back? I know he got rid of the turnover chain. I think the quote was, "It's not part of our culture here." Of course, you got NC State. I'm really intrigued with him, with Dave Doran, the team he's got coming back. Quarterback Devin Leary threw more touchdown passes last year in the season than Phillip Rivers ever did. And then you got Wake Forest. I know defensively they struggled last year. They went 11-3, but Sam Hartman's back. Got some of their top receivers, got some of his playmakers back. But for you, when you look at the ACC, if someone was to knock off Clemson this season, who do you think it would be?
Well, I'm looking at NC State. I mean, I do think this is kind of Dave Doran's one of those guys that just kind of, is under the radar, so to speak, as a head coach. I mean, there's times when they went through their difficult times when we first got there, and people were thinking, Dave's not going to last, he's going to be fired, within a couple of years. They returned 10 players on defense. This is one of the most complete defenses from top to bottom. And you're right. I think Devin Leary is obviously an elite quarterback. I mean, they're gonna go out there and they're gonna have opportunities, to put up some points. I think that's gonna be interesting. I think Wake is gonna be another one, as you mentioned, to consider. The only thing I would say about Wake, Wake offensively is going to be is pretty much not missed a beat with Sam Hartman back at quarterback. I mean, I think he's going to be there. I think defensively, to me, for Wake, it's all going to come down to how do they adjust to Brad Lambert. Brad Lambert comes back as a defensive coordinator. They were solid under him before. Can they be that way again? Can these guys step up and make the play? So I think the Atlantic to me is interesting with that battle right there. I do think of the Coastal. I look at Miami. I think Miami. There's a lot of expectations on this program. Believe me, I'm here in Florida, and I can tell you there's so much. The sky high. I mean, people believe that this Miami team's going to go out there and win the ACC this year. I'm not sold they're going to win the ACC. I think they're going to be good. There's opportunities to be good, but it's always tough in that first year. And then we got Pitt, who returns. Again, this is a team that surprised people by winning the division last year, winning the conference last year. They got a new quarterback. Can they come back and be just as strong? So I think those maybe four teams outside of Clemson are the ones I think they have a good shot at maybe making a run at it.
Yeah, Miami, I'm intrigued with Tyler Van Dyke because it kind of felt like maybe he come out of, for a lot of people, he came out of nowhere last year when he came in for Derek King. So now he has expectations on him now to be really good. I mean, you've seen his name put on draft boards. That's where the expectations are with him. So I'm always intrigued with quarterbacks like that. They kind of come out of nowhere their first year starting, and then that next year when they have expectations. I think that's probably, I would think that's a big part if Miami can be successful this year, if he's able to live up those expectations and develop further on as a quarterback.
Well, very much so. And I think people tend to forget, Tyler Van Dyke was the third string quarterback going into the season. He really wasn't expected to play a factor, but they had injuries. They lost Derek King, they lost Jake Garcia. So all of a sudden, Tyler comes in and he's the guy, and he's thrown in that mix, and he steps up and performs. And he did a great job. Obviously, he was freshman of the year. I think, yes, how does he take that next step? And it's not going to, and I think he's going to do well, but I caution people, let's not forget, you got a new coaching staff, so you got a new offensive coordinator. You lost two of your best, receiving, some of your best receiving players, in Charleston Rambo and Mike Hartley. So, they're going to have some new guys step up and start making some plays. Their offensive line returns, I think it's about 3 starters. So they're going to have to get some growth on that front. So I think offensively this team's got potential, but again, there's going to have to be a little bit of growth there coming out. And then defensively, how does this team step up? We know Mario Cristobal is a defensive-minded guy. how does this defense step up under Kevin Steele, a former SEC defensive coordinator? How does it play? Can it be better? Can it hold some teams down? I think they benefit from the fact that they start off against an FCS opponent in Bethune-Cookman, and they got Southern Miss. But that at Texas A&M game, in the third week of the season, I think to me could say a lot about. We could see how good or how bad this Miami team is going to be. If they could somehow knock off the Aggies in College Station, I mean, then the sky's the limit for this team moving forward.
Yeah, that's going to be big. And I did see that. I had actually, before I started prepping, I forgot that Kevin Steele was going to be the defensive coordinator at Miami. And I'm just going to tell Mario Cristobal, if you're listening to this podcast, just don't let him get too close with boosters. Just ask Gus Malzahn how that turned out for him at Auburn. But Florida State. That's a team, of course, I told you off the air where I'm from. There's a lot of Florida State fans. What is your thought on them going into year 3 of Mike Norvell? They played better toward the end of last year, but obviously there's still some struggles there. Jordan Travis, the quarterback. I know they got some transfers coming in. And it's really, and I know it's not Mike Norvell. It's really Taggart has been a struggle, and toward the end of Jimbo Fisher. Just what's your read on Florida State going into the season?
Well, I think they can make. I think there's going to be improvement there. I mean, I think the biggest factor to me was that when they started, when they got into January, they had basically 95%. They went into their spring camp and had 95% of their roster already on campus, and that's huge. I mean, they were able to get guys, early enrollees to come in. They brought in, I think it was 22 newcomers. They had guys committed to being there and wanting to be out there on the field, getting into the weight program, getting out there and getting the playbook. So that I think is going to be huge for them. They really didn't have that. Think about 2020 with the pandemic. They didn't. They had one spring practice, and then they had, like everyone else, they had to basically go into quarantine, so to speak, and so they struggled, and then they weren't able to kind of bond as a team, and I think that really hurt them, especially under their first-year coach. I think last year you saw a little bit of that hangover in the first 4 games of the season. They didn't look like a team that had been very locked in. All of a sudden things start to click after they go 0-4, and you saw the second half of the season they really came on strong. So I think that's where, going into the season, I think they have the potential to really showcase themselves. Again, they've settled on Jordan Travis. He's going to be the starting quarterback. He's shown a lot of growth over the year. I think the best move they did last year, even though it didn't pay off on the field, was bringing in Mackenzie Milton as a transfer quarterback. I think that 1 year under Milton, I think, helped Travis understand exactly what it takes to be an elite quarterback. It's all the leadership stuff. So I think that's going to help him. I think he's gotten more confident in the offense. I think they did a great job of getting the transfer portal to get pieces around him. I think the wide receiver spot's going to be interesting. Ontario Wilson coming back. You got Malik McClain, who's going to be there. Keyshawn Helton. They bring in a transfer and Micah Pittman, from Oregon, who's really, really solid player. Johnny Wilson's a tall guy, 6'7". I saw him during spring, made great leaping catches. I think that's something they haven't had over the last couple of years. And then this offensive line, which has been a struggle, now they've added some depth and some pieces through the transfer portal. This is probably their biggest strength on the offense. And defensively, they're solid on the first, the 2 deep roster. So they've done some pieces. Now, are these players on the defense typical Florida State players that we're used to, in the heyday? Probably not, but they're good enough, and I think they can find a way to win some games. To me, I think 7 wins is probably a legitimate, where they can be at. I mean, because I think, they open up on week 0 against Duquesne. I think they can beat them, an FCS school. LSU game in week 2 is going to be amazing. That's week 1 is going to be amazing for them. And then they've got some good games on the schedule, and I think they have a possibility of flips. So that's what needs to happen, because I think if they get to be a bowl eligible and they get to a bowl game, I think that's only going to help Mike Norvell when it comes to recruiting. He's getting there. He just needs to start getting those elite classes, which Florida State's used to having.
Yeah, that LSU game in week 1 is going to be very intriguing, because you got LSU situation with Brian Kelly, his first game as LSU coach. He's brought a lot of transfers in, and I think that actually helps Florida State playing in week 0, because some of their new guys, they will have played a game. So I think honestly that Florida State, I think, has an advantage there. But I've also heard Brian Kelly said he may look back at the film from last year when Notre Dame played Florida State. So that's an intriguing matchup there in week 1 between those two.
Yeah, it really is, and I think for me, I'm not putting in, listen, if they beat LSU, I think, and they start out 2-0, I think that's huge, obviously, in a lot of ways. But I'm not saying if they don't beat LSU that the season's in the dumper. I think they have opportunities. Obviously, they get a bye after that game. They go on the road to Louisville. Obviously, that's going to be a challenge. They get Boston College. I think the front part of that schedule is going to be a little tough at times. But then I think they have opportunities. They have opportunities to make some noise. But again, I think a lot of it is they need to develop the depth. And they need to, as long as Jordan Travis stays healthy. Now that's a big key right there, because if you look at their bench, I mean, they really have not a lot behind him. I mean, Tate Rodemaker is probably more likely to go in as a backup. He started one game last year. He was used very little, at times. They feel like they continue to develop him. They got a freshman and true freshman, AJ Duffy, who's got the potential to be a really good quarterback. But again, as a true freshman, it's awful hard. But he came in January, so he's the guy who could be there. So I think, to me, I think there's some things that have to go out right for this Florida State team to make it all work out. But this is one of those things where, listen, if they go down, if they start losing 2 or 3 games in a row, I'm not sure how well the fan base is going to react to that. I think they already feel like they want to see some definite, improvement this year. And there are some of those in Tallahassee area, probably in your area as well, that are, eager to think about what could happen if you get a guy like a Deion Sanders, if you could convince him to leave, Jackson State and come back to Florida State and be the coach. I mean, there's some people who've talked about that. I think Mike Norvell's a good coach. I think he can get the job done. It's just taken him a little detour because of everything that's gone on in the country.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%, and I know Florida State fans are looking forward to hope can get back to the glory days. And Matt, this has been a lot of fun. I kept you 5 minutes longer than I said I would, but this has been a whole lot of fun talking ACC and college football with you. If the listeners want to follow you online, where can they find you and all the work you're doing?
Yeah, they can go to, I'm on Twitter at Matt Murschel, or they can go to OrlandoSentinel.com and get all the latest. I'm working on our football section right now, which comes out in a couple, 4 or 5 weeks. And also we're in the middle of a really good name, image, and likeness series that me and my coworkers have been working on, which is about a 5-part series looking at different aspects of name, image, and likeness. So take a look at that as well, and it'll kind of maybe open your eyes to some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody go check it out. Matt does a great job keeping you up to date on all things college football. And Matt, I appreciate you coming on the show, and hope we can do this again sometime down the road. Yep,
I look forward to it. Let's not wait 2 years. Let's try to do it sooner than that.
I promise it will not be 2 years. Our thanks again to Matt Murschel for coming on today's edition of Talking College Football. And we will be talking with Matt throughout the season. I promise you it will not be 2 years when you hear him again here on the show. Real quickly, before we get out of here, I keep the podcast between the 30-40 minute range. Tennessee news on Friday hit. I guess it's that Friday's news dump. Best time to do it. Which is the NCAA coming out with this. Of course, there's always been in the conversation, Jeremy Pruitt, NCAA looking into things. But it came out with some level 1 allegations against Tennessee. There's a lot. Some of the highlights in here. Impermissible recruiting benefits totaling around $60,000 that were paid to prospect players and their families under former head coach Jeremy Pruitt. Pruitt accused of providing about $9,000 to mothers of 2 different prospects. His wife Casey accused of making 25 cash payments totaling about $12,500 to help a prospect's mother make her car payment. 12 athletes played in 60 games that were ineligible. Of course, Jeremy Pruitt was fired in January 2021. He had a 16-19 record as a coach. So, hey, you're cheating, but you had a losing record as a head coach. Just 18 allegations. So, remember, these are allegations against Tennessee. It's unfortunate with these things. It affects the next coach, Josh Heupel, what they're doing. But Jeremy Pruitt should never coach again. Never, never, ever should we see Jeremy Pruitt on the sideline again. That's just some news that hit. Big news hit this past week. Coming out of SEC Media Days, Kirby Smart got a new contract. And also, Alabama picked to win the SEC. One voter picked Vanderbilt to win. But I believe it's going to be Alabama and Georgia in the SEC Championship game, and I wouldn't be shocked if they played again in the college football playoff. But that's just That's just my feeling on that one. We guys are going to get out of here. Just wanted to talk about that real quickly. We'll probably jump into more of that on Thursday's podcast with Adam Spencer from Saturday Down South. Be interested to get his thoughts there. We'll look back at SEC Media Days and just look ahead to the 2022 SEC football season. Should be a lot of fun. Please go check out the NFL Pod, the Cover 2 NFL podcast. Last 2 weeks, NFC and AFC East previews, Brian Manning and Matt Barbado. Wednesday on the Cover 2 NFL podcast, I'll be joined by Brian Jones from popculture.com. Used to cover the Packers for 24/7 Sports. We'll be previewing the NFC North on that one. So please go check that show out as well. And once again, repeat, be back on Thursday, SEC preview with Adam Spencer from Saturday Down South. Remember, you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. The podcast available on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, you can check out Talkin College Football. And you can always email me at sports.philipjordan@gmail.com. Talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.